Elin Tavik arrived at Kethren on the 42nd day of the winter cycle, with a transfer file that weighed 4 pages and a rucksack that weighed less than my sidearm. I know this because I was the one who carried her intake kit from the docking arm to the processing desk, and I remember thinking the bag felt empty. Later I learned it was not empty. It contained 2 changes of clothing, a toiletry pouch, a set of survey tools she had owned since she was 14, and a ration supplement she had mixed herself from a formula she kept in her head. She did not own a personal terminal. She did not own a sidearm. She had arrived at the most demanding combined forces training facility in the Keth administrative zone, with less personal equipment than most cadets brought for a single overnight field drill. I did not think much of it at the time. The Kethren Combined Forces Academy processes between 40 and 60 incoming cadets per enrollment window, drawn from 11 species across 4 administrative zones. The academy is built into the mid-ring of Kethren Station, a Keth orbital facility positioned in the trailing Lagrange point of a Class II administrative world. Everything about the station is regulated, monitored, and held to specification. The corridors are resonant alloy. The lighting cycles on a 22-hour standard. The atmospheric processors maintain a nitrogen-oxygen blend calibrated to the median respiratory tolerance of the 11 enrolled species, which means it is slightly too dry for the Sauron, slightly too cold for the Orc, and precisely correct for no one. It is, in every measurable way, the opposite of a Deathworld. Humans were uncommon at Kethren but not unheard of. Elin was the 3rd to enroll in the last 9 years, according to the admissions archive, and the 1st to be classified below grade 12. That classification is where the story begins and where it will end. My name is Sauron Kale. I am Sauron from Sorathdon, a Class 4 origin world, atmospheric volatility, moderate particulate toxicity, seasonal thermal inversions that can shift 60 degrees in under 2 hours. Our summers bring alkaline dust storms that strip exposed tissue in minutes. Our winters bring ice fog so dense it occludes thermal vision. We are built for reading weather and surviving it, not for combat. The Sauron skeletal frame is narrow, flexible, optimized for low-drag movement through high-wind environments. My eyes are amber because the Sorathdon atmosphere filters short-wavelength light, and amber pigmentation compensates. I mention these details because they will matter later, not for what they allowed me to do in the corridor, but for what they allowed me to see. My enrollment at Kethren was a signals and navigation track with a tactical integration requirement, which is a formal way of saying the Keth want their communications specialists to understand what happens on the ground so they stop routing fire support to the wrong grid square. I was 10 months into my cycle when Elin arrived and was assigned to my cohort. The cohort was 12 cadets, 4 Keth, 3 Sauron including myself, 2 Orc, 1 Drellin, 1 Vethari, and 1 human. The Keth cadets were quiet, precise, and built like they had been assembled from administrative manuals, gray carapaced, 6-limbed, Class 3 origin, every motion calibrated to the nearest half-degree. They worked in pairs. They spoke in procedural notation. They did not raise their voices, because their species had not developed the musculature for it. The Orc were the opposite. Drev Thane was the senior of the 2, and you could hear him from 3 corridors away on a calm day. He stood 2 heads above me, bone-ridged plates running the length of his forearms and along the crest of his spine, eyes the color of dull iron from a Class 9 world where the defining evolutionary pressure had been something with jaws the size of a shuttle hatch. The Orc measure everything by origin grade. Their greeting customs involve the exchange of homeworld specifications, atmospheric pressure, mean predator mass, survival to maturity ratio. Drev's survival to maturity ratio was 41%, which meant that fewer than half the Orc born on his world lived long enough to reach the age of enrollment. He mentioned this often. He was combat-bred, honor-measured, and approximately as subtle as a hull breach. The Drellin was our biometric assessor, Vorsilith, Not a cadet, but an academy board evaluator embedded in the cohort to calibrate training loads. Tall, narrow-framed, translucent skin over a vascular lattice, you could watch pulse if the light was right. The Drellin evolved on a tidally locked world where the Terminator zone, the narrow band between permanent day and permanent night, was the only habitable latitude. Their biology is built around precision measurement. The vascular lattice functions as a distributed sensory organ that reads minute changes in temperature, pressure, and electromagnetic field. Vorsilith could tell you your resting heart rate by standing in the same room. He evaluated every incoming cadet's origin world substrate against the Academy's grading methodology and assigned a training tier. The methodology was 114 pages long. I had read 12 of them and understood perhaps 4. What mattered to the cadets was the output, a single number, grade 1 through grade 15, that determined which training track you entered, which corridors you could access, and which exercises were calibrated to your physiology. Alin Tavik's output was grade 7. The number was unusual enough that it circulated through the cohort within a day. Not because grade 7 was low, several Keth cadets graded at 3 or 4, and I graded at 4 myself, but because her file listed her origin world as Korath Ven, classification 15, a class 15 Deathworld. The kind of origin that, in any standard intake, would have placed her on the hazard track immediately, locked her biometric profile under restricted monitoring, and triggered a review of the cohort's proximity clearances. Instead, her file carried a supplemental notation I had never seen before: diluted origin, grade 7. Attenuation coefficient applied per methodology supplement 11C. Substrate degradation assessed at formative period environmental displacement, ages 11 through 17, Keth Administrative Station Pelith Var, Class 2 regulated environment. Effective origin grade reduced from 15 to 7. Standard tier training track authorized. Vorsilith had evaluated her personally. His assessment ran 6 pages, longer than any other cadets by a factor of 3. The methodology's central claim was that a human raised on a Class 15 world but relocated to a Class 2 administrative station during formative neural and musculoskeletal development would exhibit measurable attenuation of Deathworld substrate markers, threat response latency, pain gate threshold, proprioceptive acuity, autonomic override capacity. 7 years of regulated atmosphere, regulated gravity, regulated temperature, and regulated nutrition would, the model predicted, produce a substrate that retained the architecture of a Class 15 origin but expressed at a significantly reduced intensity. The numbers were clean. The math was cited. The regression models were plotted to 4 decimal places. The assessment board had signed off unanimously. The cadets accepted it. I accepted it. The number was on the file, and the file was what we had. Drev Thane accepted it loudest. He took to calling her the partial within the first week, not with malice exactly, but with the particular dismissiveness of someone who measures worth in origin grade and considers anything below Class 8 to be furniture. He said it the way you would say the clerk or the temp, a label that closed the question before it could open. The other Orc cadet Ren, quieter, younger content to follow Drev's assessments, adopted the term without comment. Even the Keth used it once or twice in procedural notation, where it appeared as PO7 beside her name on exercise rosters. Partial origin, grade 7. A designation that fit neatly into a tracking column and asked nothing further. Alin did not respond to the term. She did not respond to anything that was not a direct operational question. This was not defiance. It was not strategy. It was, as far as I could determine in 7 months of close observation, simply how she operated. She received information, processed it, and acted on it if it was relevant. If it was not relevant, she set it down. For 7 months, Alin Tavik performed exactly as a grade 7 cadet would be expected to perform. She ran the conditioning circuits at a pace that was above average but not exceptional. She scored in the upper third on tactical assessments. She passed her environmental exposure certifications with margins that were comfortable but unremarkable. She ate in the dining hall at the same time every day, always alone, always the same seat near the ventilation outlet where the air cycled fastest. She did not complain. She did not distinguish herself. She did not do anything that would make Vorseelith's assessment look wrong. Except for small things that I noticed, because noticing small things is what Sauron do. Our species survived Saurathdon by reading the environment before it turned. A thermal inversion that shifts 60 degrees in 2 hours gives you a 20-minute warning if you know what to look for: a pressure texture in the air, a particular quality of light through the alkaline haze, a stillness in the upper wind that means the inversion layer is about to collapse. We are built to read the precursors. We cannot help it. And once I started reading Elin Tavik's precursors, I could not stop. She never flinched at loud sounds, not once in 7 months. The Kethren corridors are built from resonant alloy, and a dropped equipment crate can produce a pressure pulse that makes my inner ears ring for a full minute. Every cadet in the cohort, including Drev, including me, including the Keth, who are physiologically incapable of producing a flinch but whose carapace emits a subsonic click that serves the same function, had a visible startle response the first time it happened near them. Elin's head turned toward the sound the way you would turn toward someone calling your name, acknowledgement without alarm. I noted this the first time. By the 3rd month, I had stopped noting it and started watching for it. It never came. Not when a training drone misfired in the exercise bay. Not when the station's hull plating groaned during a thermal adjustment cycle. Not when Drev Thane, in a fit of orc emphasis, struck the briefing table hard enough to crack the surface, and every other cadet in the room jumped or clicked or flared. She healed faster than her file predicted. A training abrasion that Vorseelith's biometric model projected at 4 days to close was sealed in 2. A contusion from a sparring drill, Elin paired with a Keth cadet in a grappling exercise, where the Keth's 6-limbed hold technique is considered species optimal, and the expected outcome for a grade 7 human was controlled submission inside 30 seconds, left a mark on her forearm that should have limited her range of motion for a week. It was functionally gone in 3 days. When I asked her about it once, casually in the dining hall, she looked at her own arm as if noticing the mark for the first time and said, "It does that." She did not elaborate. The sparring result, incidentally, was not controlled submission in 30 seconds. It was a technical draw at 4 minutes, which the instructor logged without comment and which Pel Orenth, the Keth cadet, did not discuss afterward. She slept less than anyone in the cohort. The dormitory wings corridor lighting dims to a low-spectrum amber at 2200, and the ambient noise settles to the hum of the atmospheric processors. On the nights when my own sleep was interrupted, Sauron thermal regulation runs poorly in station-standard environments, and I would wake during the humidity troughs that the processors cycle through between 100 and 300. I would see her light on through the gap at the bottom of her quarters door. Not every night. Most nights. When I asked her once whether the schedule was difficult for her, she said, "I sleep 4 hours. That is normal." I checked the Academy's comparative physiology database later. The entry for Deathworld origin humans listed average sleep requirement at 6 to 8 hours, with a notation that Class 12 and above origin populations frequently operate on 4 to 5. The notation was filed under substrate-driven variants. Vorseelith's attenuation model predicted 6 to 7 hours for a diluted origin grade 7. She was sleeping at the Class 15 baseline. I did not flag this. I should have. There was also the incident in the maintenance corridor during our 4th month. A coolant line coupling failed in the bulkhead adjacent to the training bay, producing a high-pressure jet of thermal transfer fluid at -60 degrees. 2 Keth maintenance workers were caught in the spray, their carapaces frosted instantly, and one went into thermal shock. The corridor alarm activated. Cadets were instructed to evacuate away from the breach. Elin walked toward it. Not ran, walked, at the same unhurried pace she used for everything. She reached the corridor junction before the damage control team, located the manual shutoff valve behind a panel she should not have known the location of, and closed it. The spray stopped. She came back to the training bay with thermal transfer frost on her right forearm and sleeve. It was -60. She did not mention it. The frost melted. The skin underneath was flushed red, not damaged. When the damage control chief asked her how she had known where the shutoff was, she said, "I read the station's maintenance schematic in my first week. It is posted in the technical reference bay." It was posted. No one else had read it. She watched rooms. Not the way a Sauron watches a room, cataloging exits, reading thermal differentials, mapping the air currents for atmospheric precursors. She watched the way something watches terrain it might have to cross. Her eyes would move across a space when she first entered it. Walls, ceiling, floor, exits, sight lines, structural elements, not fast, not slow. And then she would choose where to stand or sit with a certainty that suggested the assessment was already complete. It was so quiet you could miss it entirely if you were not looking. I was looking. I did not know what I was seeing. I told myself it was grade 7 behavior in an above-average cadet from a difficult origin world, that the flinch absence was cultural, that the healing was within statistical variance, that the room watching was habit from a childhood spent in uncertain environments. I filed each observation under explanations that fit the number on her file, and I moved on. 7 months of that. 7 months of the file saying one thing and the small details saying something I was not yet willing to hear. Not because I was afraid of the answer, but because the file was Vorsilith's work, and Vorsilith was the most precise evaluator I had ever encountered, and the possibility that his precision had been applied to the wrong variable had not occurred to me. Then the corridor exercise was announced. The Kethren Tactical Corridor is the Academy's capstone assessment for Combined Forces cohorts. It is a multi-stage simulated environment built into the lower decks of the station, 11 sequential compartments, each presenting a different category of challenge. Environmental hazard, physical obstacle, combat scenario with autonomous training systems, navigation under degraded conditions, resource management under load, tactical decision-making under time pressure. The stages are not randomized. They follow a fixed sequence that the cadets are briefed on in advance. The difficulty, however, is calibrated dynamically based on the team's assessed capability. A standard Tier 6 corridor presents the same stage categories as a Class 9 corridor, but at a load scaled to the expected physiological and cognitive range of the team's average grade. Teams of 4, assigned by the board. Our team, Sauron Kale, Signals and Navigation, Pel Oranth, Keth, Systems and Procedure, Drev Thane, Orc, Combat and Heavy Load, Elin Tavik, Human, General Tactical. The calibration was set by averaging our individual grades. Pel was a 3, I was a 4. Drev was a 9. Elin was filed at 7. The average came to 5.75, rounded to standard Tier 6. The corridor would present challenges scaled to a team of 4 grade 6 cadets with mixed capabilities. Drev was unhappy with this. He said so in the briefing room, loudly enough that the resonant alley walls carried it to the adjacent corridor, in front of Vorsilith and the corridor technician, and everyone else. He said a standard Tier 6 corridor was a waste of his time. He said he had run Class 9 drills since he was old enough to hold a weapon, and he was not here to walk a grade 6 obstacle path with a partial and 2 signal operators. He used the word partial 3 times in 90 seconds. Vorsilith noted his objection on a tablet. Elin, sitting 2 rows behind me, did not react. She was reading the corridor's stage briefing on her own tablet. I could see her screen from my angle. She was on Stage 7, Environmental Compression, which was 4 stages ahead of where most cadets bother to read before entry. The exercise was scheduled for the following morning. We assembled at the corridor's entry hatch at 600. Pel had his carapace polished to inspection standard, and his 6 limbs moving in the precise, coordinated pattern that Keth adopt when they are nervous and trying not to show it. The mid-limbs cycle slightly faster than the upper and lower pairs, producing a subtle ripple that their species can read but most others miss. Drev had his bone ridges oiled and his training armor cinched tight. His expression was the flat iron mask of an orc preparing for something he considers beneath him. I had my signals kit, a sidearm I had never discharged outside of a range lane, and the quiet conviction that I would perform adequately and be forgotten. Alin had her rucksack, the same one from intake, still looking half empty, and a pair of boots that had been resoled at least twice. She was stretching her hands, opening and closing her fingers in a slow, rhythmic pattern that I had seen her do before training sessions. I had assumed it was a warm-up exercise. Watching it now, in the corridor's harsh lighting, it looked more like a calibration, a systems check, performed by someone who trusted the system and was confirming readiness the way an engineer confirms a switch position. The corridor technician, a Keth maintenance specialist named Orvath, ran the pre-entry checklist. Environmental seals confirmed, training systems armed, biometric monitors linked, difficulty calibration, standard tier 6. He read the calibration aloud. Alin's expression did not change. Drev's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Orvath keyed the entry sequence. The hatch opened. Stage 1 was a navigation problem. Degraded lighting, particulate interference, 3 branching corridors with only one leading to the next stage. Standard orientation exercise. Pell solved it in under 2 minutes using his Keth spatial mapping reflex, a carapace-mounted sensory organ that reads acoustic return off corridor walls. He identified the live corridor by its resonance signature and led us through without hesitation. Efficient. Clean. I logged the stage time on my signals kit. We moved through. Stage 2 was a physical obstacle, a vertical climb through a shaft with intermittent gravity plating that cycled on and off at irregular intervals. The high-gravity pulses pressed you against the shaft wall. The low-gravity windows let you climb. The interval between them was not fixed. It varied by half a second in either direction, enough to make timing difficult. Drev went first, hauling himself up with the brute certainty of something built for Class 9 terrain. His bone-ridged forearms locked into the grip holds with a force that left marks in the alloy. I went second, slower, using the gravity cycles to rest and time my movements to the average interval. Pell used his 6 limbs to brace in the shaft during the high-gravity pulses, spreading the load across 3 anchor points. Alin went last. She climbed steadily, without rushing, and I noticed she timed her movements to land on the grip holds during the low-gravity windows with a precision that suggested she had already mapped the cycle interval. Not the average, the actual interval for each pulse. I checked later. The cycle varied between 4.3 and 5.1 seconds. She had it within 2 pulses. Stage 3 was a combat scenario. Autonomous training drones, non-lethal kinetic projectors mounted on articulated mounts in a compartment with partial cover. The drones were calibrated to standard tier 6, moderate tracking speed, predictable patrol patterns, single target engagement only. Drev handled it. He moved through the compartment the way Orc moved through everything, fast, direct, overwhelming. He used his bone-ridged forearms as partial kinetic shields, absorbing 2 glancing rounds on the plates and closing the distance before the drones could reacquire. He cleared the compartment in 90 seconds. Alin stayed near the back, covering the entry corridor behind us. She did not fire once, but she was not idle. She was watching the drones' movement patterns, not the drones themselves, but the way they tracked, the speed of their gimbal rotation, the interval between their shots, the angle at which they lost lock on a moving target. She was reading the architecture of the tracking algorithm, not the output of the engagement. I did not understand why at the time. Stage 4 was environmental, a compartment flooded with a low-oxygen atmospheric mix at elevated pressure. Standard for mid-tier. Uncomfortable for me, My Sarin respiratory system is optimized for thin, turbulent air, not thick, still air. Routine for Drev. Pell sealed his carapace vents and switched to stored air, a Keth adaptation for brief atmospheric exposure that gives them approximately 4 minutes of independence from external atmosphere. Elin breathed normally. Her respiration rate did not change. Vorseelith's biometric feed, which I could see on my signals kit's secondary display, showed her blood oxygen levels holding steady at a saturation the model predicted she should not be able to maintain without supplemental breathing in that atmosphere. The model expected 79%. She held at 94. I noted it. I did not say anything. We moved through. Stages 5 and 6 followed the expected pattern. A physical obstacle, a crawl through a confined passage with intermittent electrical discharge along the walls, and then a resource management problem, allocating a limited power supply across 4 systems to keep a simulated life support grid running while the corridor drained it from the other end. The crawl was uncomfortable. The electrical discharges were calibrated to produce pain without injury at Standard Tier 6, a stimulus intended to test composure under sustained discomfort. I managed it by focusing on my breathing rhythm. Drev powered through it with his bone plates absorbing the contact points. Pell's carapace insulated him entirely. Elin crawled at a steady pace and her biometric feed showed no autonomic spike, no cortisol elevation, no heart rate change, no pupil dilation. The pain stimulus was below her threshold. Not at her threshold, below it. The resource management problem was pure Keth procedural logic. Pell excelled at it. 4 systems, limited input, a drain rate that exceeded input by 12%. The solution was an allocation sequence that prioritized the 3 critical systems in rotation, letting the 4th cycle between active and standby. Pell solved the allocation in under 3 minutes. Elin watched him work and said one word, Vent 3. Pell looked at her. Vent 3 was one of the 4 systems, the atmospheric scrubber for the secondary corridor. He checked the flow metrics. She was right, diverting 8% of the allocation from Vent 3 to the primary scrubber during the 3rd rotation cycle extended the grid's stable window by 11 seconds, which was the margin between passing and failing the stage timer. The correction was not in the briefing materials. It was not part of the designed solution. She had read the system's flow architecture and identified an inefficiency that the exercise designers had either missed or included deliberately as an undocumented margin. Pell adjusted. We passed. He did not ask how she had seen it. His carapace clicked once the Keth stress acknowledgement and he moved on. Stage 7 is where the corridor changed. The compartment was an environmental compression chamber, designed to simulate rapid atmospheric transition, the kind of pressure shift you encounter moving between a pressurized habitat and an unregulated planetary surface. Standard Tier 6 calibration should have produced a pressure differential of approximately 0.4 atmospheres over 12 seconds. Uncomfortable. Manageable. I had trained for it in my 2nd month. The briefing materials specified 0.4 as the target differential. The differential that hit us was 1.1 atmospheres over 6 seconds. I felt it in my inner ears first, a deep, nauseating pressure that dropped through my skull like a stone into water. My Sarin equilibrium system, designed for atmospheric volatility but not for this rate of change, lost its reference frame. The room tilted. I grabbed the nearest structural support and held. My vision narrowed. My hearing flattened to a dull hum. Pell's carapace cracked, not fractured, stress cracked, along the ventral seam of his upper thorax where the shell is thinnest. The sound it made was like a knuckle popping, amplified through the resonantally floor. He went down immediately, all 6 limbs folding inward in the Keth emergency seal posture, his body locking rigid to protect his internal pressure. He was out. The corridor's biometric system flagged him as non-ambulatory, and an extraction marker lit on the wall beside him. Drev braced against the compression with his bone ridges flared, his jaw clenched, His iron-colored eyes narrowed to slits. He held. But I could see the strain in the vascular patterns along his neck, dark lines surfacing under his skin, where the blood pressure was spiking against the external load. This was not standard tier 6. This was at his limit. I checked my signals kit. The calibration readout on the secondary display had changed. The corridor's active difficulty was no longer standard tier 6. It read class 9. I looked at Drev. He was already looking at the ceiling, where the calibration feed was displayed on a maintenance panel that senior cadets had access to but were not authorized to modify without board approval. His expression was not surprise. It was not guilt. It was something closer to validation, the look of someone who had made a point and was now watching it land. He had changed the calibration. I do not know precisely when he did it. I do not know whether he used his senior cadet override during the entry sequence or found an access point between stages. What I know is that the corridor was now running at the difficulty his origin grade demanded, and 2 of the 4 people in his team were not built for it. "Keep moving," he said. His voice was tight, not apologetic. He turned toward stage 8. I looked at Alin. She was standing in the center of the compartment, her rucksack still on her shoulders, her breathing unchanged. The 1.1 atmosphere compression differential that had cracked Pell's carapace and brought Drev to the edge of his structural tolerance had not registered on her body at all. Her posture was the same. Her pupils were the same diameter. Her hands, hanging at her sides, were loose and still. Her biometric feed, still running on my signals kit's display, showed a resting heart rate of 58 beats per minute, the same rate she maintained in the dining hall. She looked at me. Then she looked at the calibration readout on my signals kit. She read the number class 9 the way you would read a room temperature. Acknowledged, filed, set down. "That is not what we were briefed for," I said. "No," she said. "Can you?" "Yes." She did not wait for me to finish the question. She turned and followed Drev into stage 8. I followed because I did not know what else to do. Stage 8 was a combat scenario. Autonomous drones, kinetic projectors, partial cover. The same format as stage 3, the same compartment architecture, the same targeting system family, the same engagement geometry. But at class 9 calibration, the drones were faster, more numerous, and running a predictive tracking algorithm that standard tier 6 drones do not carry. They anticipated movement. They led their shots by 2 to 3 body widths depending on the target's assessed velocity. They worked in coordinated pairs, with one drone suppressing and the other flanking. Drev went in hard, the way he always did. He moved fast, low, using his bone-ridged forearms as partial kinetic shields, a technique his species developed against the megafauna of his origin world, where a charging predator's claw strike could be deflected by a properly angled bone plate. It worked for 12 seconds. Then one of the drone's predictive shots caught him on the left shoulder, spinning him into a cover wall. He rolled, came up, took another hit on the right thigh. His armor absorbed it, but his leg buckled. He went to one knee. The drones tracked his position. 3 of them converged. Ellen moved. She did not move fast. She moved precisely. She crossed the compartment on a line that I recognized only afterward as the one path through the drone's overlapping fields of fire that did not intersect with any of their tracking arcs at the moment. She entered each zone. She had read the pattern. In stage 3, while Drev was clearing the standard tier drones by brute force, she had been watching their architecture, the gimbal rotation speed, the tracking interval, the angle of acquisition loss. The Class 9 drones used the same base algorithm with tighter parameters. She had already mapped it. She reached Drev's position, took his sidearm from his thigh holster. He was too stunned to stop her, or too deep in the orc combat loss processing that follows an unexpected defeat to register the motion, and used it to disable 2 drones in 2 shots while standing in the 4-inch gap between a cover wall and a support strut that the drone's tracking algorithm could not resolve at its refresh rate. She had found the blind spot. She had known it was there before she entered the stage. The third drone tracked her. She did not shoot it. She stepped behind Drev, let the drone's predictive algorithm lead its shot to where she had been standing, and the kinetic round struck the cover wall 6 inches from Drev's head. He flinched. She waited. The drone cycled its projector, a 1.3-second reload interval that the standard Tier 6 version did not have but the Class 9 version required due to the higher kinetic load. In that interval she stepped out, fired once and the drone dropped. The compartment went quiet. Drev looked at her. His iron eyes were wide. Not anger, not gratitude, something he did not have a word for. His bone ridges, which had been flared in combat posture since Stage 7, began to retract. Slowly, the way orc ridges retract only when the body acknowledges something it cannot override with will. "Can you walk?" she said. He could walk, barely. The thigh hit had compromised his right leg enough that his stride was a controlled lurch, and the bone plate along his shin was hairline cracked from the impact absorption. She handed his sidearm back. He took it without speaking. Stage 9 was environmental, a thermal gradient. The corridor dropped the ambient temperature from station standard to approximately -40 over 20 seconds. I watched Elin's biometric feed as the temperature fell. At -10, her peripheral vascular system began the cold flush response, capillaries dilating rather than constricting, pushing warm blood to the skin surface. At -20, her core temperature had not shifted at all. At -30, where my own extremities would have lost function, and where the Keth began carapace contraction, her hands were still open, still relaxed, her fingers moving in that same slow calibration pattern I had seen before the corridor began. At -40, the compartment's minimum, she was standing with her sleeves rolled to the elbow, her forearms flushed red, her breath condensing in steady measured clouds. She looked uncomfortable the way I look uncomfortable in a mild rainstorm, aware of it, not impaired by it. At standard Tier 6, this would have been -15 cold, but manageable with standard issue thermal layers. At Class 9, it was a survival-grade exposure that tested the structural limits of non-cold adapted species. Drev's species is built for heat, not cold. His bone ridges are thermal mass. They absorb and retain warmth from his internal metabolism, which runs hot by galactic standards, and they regulate his body temperature by radiating excess heat through the ridge surface. In high ambient conditions, this is an elegant system. In low ambient conditions, it inverts. The ridges conduct heat outward faster than his metabolism can replace it, and his core temperature drops at a rate that exceeds his autonomic compensation. He lasted 90 seconds before the biometric system flagged his core temperature as declining toward the intervention threshold. He stopped walking. He braced himself against the corridor wall, his bone plates visibly contracting, his breath coming in shallow bursts that condensed in the freezing air. The extraction marker lit. He looked at Elin. She was standing in the same cold 3 meters away. Her skin was flushed, not pale, flushed, the capillaries in her face and hands dilated, pushing warm blood to the surface in the counterintuitive cold response pattern that Class 15 origin humans exhibit. Korath Ven's baseline ambient temperature is lower than this corridor's minimum setting. The cold was not an obstacle for her. It was closer to homecoming. Vorsilith's file had noted this under substrate markers but had calculated that 6 years on a Class 2 station would have attenuated the vascular response by 40 to 60%. Looking at the flush in her skin, deep, even, unhesitating, I knew the calculation was wrong. The response was not attenuated. It was full specification. It had been there for 7 months, unneeded and untested, waiting. Drev opened his mouth. I expected him to say something about the calibration, about the fact that he had set the corridor to his own grade, and it was now removing him before the human he had called a partial, about the bone ridges that were retracting against his will in her presence. He said nothing. He closed his mouth. The extraction system engaged and moved him from the stage. It was Alin and me. Stage 10 was the physical obstacle, a navigation problem through a zero-gravity compartment with rotating structural elements. Disorienting. The structural beams rotated on independent axes, creating a shifting maze that required continuous three-dimensional spatial mapping to navigate. My Sauron spatial awareness is above average in atmospheric conditions. I can read wind architecture and thermal layering with an acuity that most species cannot match. But in zero gravity, I lose my thermal reference frame, and my orientation degrades rapidly. The Sauron equilibrium system anchors on atmospheric gradients. Without gravity and without air movement, I have no anchor. I made it through the first section by following Alin's movements. She navigated the rotating elements the way she had navigated the drone field, on a line that seemed obvious only after she had drawn it. Her body moved through zero gravity with a fluidity that suggested her proprioceptive system did not rely on gravity for orientation. She knew where her limbs were, where the beams were, and where both would be in 2 seconds, without reference to up or down. The second section had a tighter rotation interval. I misjudged a transition, clipped a structural beam, and the impact sent me tumbling into the compartment wall hard enough to trigger the biometric intervention threshold. My left shoulder registered a contusion that the system classified as mobility limiting. The extraction marker lit beside me. "Go," I said. She looked at me, not with concern exactly. Something more practical, a quick assessment of whether I could continue, arriving at the same conclusion the biometric system had already reached. Her expression was calm, not forced calm, actual calm, the kind you cannot manufacture under load because it is not a response to the load. It is the baseline. She nodded once. "The last stage is a combined environment," I said, holding myself against the compartment wall with my functional arm. "Combat and atmospheric," the briefing said. "I read the briefing," she said. She turned and moved into the transition corridor toward stage 11. I watched her go. She did not look back. Her rucksack was still on her shoulders. Her boots, the resoled ones, gripped the deck plating without sound. The transition corridor's lighting caught the side of her face as she moved through it, and for a moment I saw her expression in profile. Focused, quiet, not tense. The expression of someone walking into a room they have already assessed. I was extracted from the compartment and routed to the monitoring room, a long, narrow observation bay above the corridor, with visual feeds from every stage and a biometric display wall that showed the vital signs of every active participant. The room smelled of quickseal compound and the sharp metallic edge of Keth stress chemistry. Pell was already there, his carapace patched with a quickseal compound, sitting rigidly in a chair designed for a species with 4 fewer limbs than he had. His midlimbs were cycling in that rapid nervous pattern, the one the Keth cannot suppress when their cognitive models have encountered data that does not fit any existing classification. Drev was in the medical alcove adjacent, his right leg immobilized in a stabilization frame, his bone ridges fully retracted and flat against his forearms, a posture I had only read about in orc physiological literature and had never seen in person. His expression was fixed on the wall-mounted display with an intensity that suggested he could not look away even if he wanted to. Vorsilith stood at the biometric display wall, his translucent skin pulsing with the Drellin vascular rhythm that indicates active cognitive processing. He had not moved, according to Pell, since Alin had entered stage 11. The corridor technician Orvath was also present, seated at a monitoring console near the back of the room. He was not supposed to be there. The monitoring room during a live exercise is restricted to evaluators and extracted participants, but his console showed the corridor's calibration record, and I suspect he had been watching since the discrepancy appeared at stage 7 and had not been able to leave. The display showed 1 active participant, TAVIC E classification, diluted origin grade 7, current corridor calibration, class 9. The two numbers sat side by side on the screen, and the gap between them was the distance between what an institution believes and what is true. Stage 11 was a combined environment combat and atmospheric scenario, the corridor's final and most demanding stage. Autonomous drones operating in a compartment with cycling atmospheric composition, oxygen-nitrogen standard for 8 seconds, then a 4-second pulse of elevated carbon dioxide at reduced oxygen, then back. The atmospheric cycling was designed to disrupt concentration, degrade motor control, and force the participant to time their actions to the breathable windows. At Class 9, the CO2 pulse was dense enough to produce impaired judgment in most species within 2 cycles. At 3 cycles, most species experience visual narrowing. At 4, motor degradation. I watched the visual feed. Alin entered the compartment and stopped. She stood still for 6 seconds, breathing, counting. I could see her chest rise and fall 3 breaths, evenly spaced, timed to the atmospheric cycle. She was mapping the interval before the first drone activated. 3 breaths, the difference between measuring a thing and knowing it. Then she moved. She worked through the compartment the way she had worked through every stage since the calibration changed. Not fast, not slow, not heroic. Methodical. She used the breathable windows for movement and the CO2 pulses for stillness. Standing motionless in cover positions she had identified during her 6-second assessment, letting the drone's tracking algorithms lose her in the atmospheric distortion that the CO2 created in their infrared sensor arrays. She had read the drone's limitation. The elevated CO2 degraded their infrared targeting. The gas absorbed and re-emitted thermal radiation at wavelengths that blurred the boundary between a warm body and a warm wall. During the pulses, she was functionally invisible to the targeting system. She disabled the first drone during a breathable window, firing from a crouch behind a structural support. 1 shot. The second she took during the transition, the 0.8-second overlap where the atmosphere was shifting from CO2 pulse to breathable standard, but the drone's sensors had not yet recalibrated to the clearing thermal field. A shot most cadets would not have attempted because the timing margin was thinner than a heartbeat. She fired once and moved before the round arrived. The monitoring room was quiet. Vorsilith's vascular rhythm had stopped pulsing and gone flat, the Drellin equivalent of held breath. Pell's carapace was clicking in a continuous low-frequency pattern I had never heard from a Keth before. I did not know what it meant. I learned later that it is an involuntary response to observing a thing the Keth classification system has no category for. The third drone was positioned at the far end of the compartment, behind a barrier that blocked line of sight from every angle the briefing map showed. The standard tactical approach, the one Drev would have used, the one the corridor was designed to test, was to advance through the compartment under fire and engage the drone at close range during a breathable window. A direct assault solution, built for a Class 9 combat specialist with bone-ridged plating and a resting heart rate of 90. Alin did not advance. She stayed in her position behind the structural support and waited. She waited through 4 full atmospheric cycles, 32 seconds of patience in a compartment where every cycle degraded the air she was breathing. Her biometric feed showed her blood oxygen saturation declining from 94 to 91 to 89%, still above the functional threshold. Still within the range her Ethven substrate could manage. She knew where the edge was because she had lived inside a body that carried the edge since birth. On the 5th breathable window, the drone's patrol algorithm brought it 1.2 meters past the edge of its barrier. It was exposed for less than 2 seconds. She fired once. The drone dropped. The compartment's completion indicator lit green. Alin stood up. She walked to the exit hatch. She keyed the completion marker on the corridor's terminal, a small wall-mounted panel that logged the participant's ID, the completion time, and the corridor's difficulty setting. The system recorded, TAVIC E-corridor complete, calibration class 9, team casualties 3 of 4, time 41 minutes 18 seconds. She walked through the exit hatch into the recovery corridor, where Orvath was waiting with a medical kit and a debrief tablet. He had moved from the monitoring room to the recovery corridor at some point during stage 11. I learned later he had left after the second drone dropped and walked down 3 decks of access stairs to be at the exit when she came through. He told me afterward that he did not know why he had done this. He said the corridor's completion protocol only required a technician to be present for medical emergencies. She was not having a medical emergency. She was having the opposite. Elin emerged from the hatch and stopped. She looked at Orvath. She looked at the medical kit in his hands. She appeared to consider whether the medical kit was for her. She appeared to determine that it was not necessary. The entire assessment took less than 2 seconds. I heard her voice on the monitoring room's audio feed. It was the same voice she used in the dining hall, in the briefing room, in the corridors between classes. No elevation, no strain, no triumph. The voice of someone asking a scheduling question because the schedule was the next thing on her list. "Is the next training block still at 1400? She said. Orvath stared at her. He looked down at his tablet. He looked back up. "Yes," he said. "Good," she said. She set her rucksack on the floor, sat on the bench beside the exit hatch, and began unlacing her boots. The left boot sole had separated partially at the toe. The adhesive on the last resole had not held through 11 stages and 41 minutes of Class 9 load. She examined the separation with the same focused attention she had given the drone field and the atmospheric cycle and the zero-gravity maze. Then she reached into her rucksack, produced a small tube of adhesive, and began repairing it. In the monitoring room, no one spoke for a long time. Pell was the first to move. He stood, walked to the display wall, and read the completion record. His carapace clicked once, a single, sharp sound. He sat back down. Drev was watching the same record on the medical alcove's wall-mounted screen. His bone ridges were fully flat. His hands were still. He watched the screen the way you watch something you have been wrong about for a long time and are now seeing clearly. He did not look away. He did not speak. Vorsilith stood at the biometric display wall for a long time. His translucent skin had gone completely still, no vascular pulse visible at all, which in Drellin physiology indicates cognitive processing that has overwhelmed the body's background rhythms. He was reading the full biometric data from Elin's run. I could see fragments of it from where I stood. Her blood oxygen saturation during the CO2 pulses had remained above 89% at its lowest. The model predicted 78. Her pain gate threshold during the environmental compression stage, the stage that had cracked Pell and nearly pulled Drev, showed no response spike. Not an attenuated spike. No spike. The threshold had not been reached because the 1.1 atmosphere differential had not been sufficient to reach it. Her proprioceptive acuity scores, derived from the tracking data of her movements through the drone fields and the zero-gravity maze, were operating at a resolution the biometric model classified as grade 14. Not 7, 14. The attenuation coefficient in Methodology Supplement 11C had assumed that formative period environmental displacement would degrade Deathworld substrate markers along a linear curve. 7 years of regulated atmosphere and regulated gravity on a Class 2 station would produce measurable reduction in threat response, pain tolerance, proprioceptive function, vascular cold adaptation, and autonomic override capacity. The numbers were clean. The math was cited. The regression models ran to 4 decimal places. The assumption underneath all of it was wrong. The substrate does not degrade. It is not behavior. It is not conditioning. It is not a skill set that atrophies without practice. It is architecture. The nervous system of a human born on a Class 15 world is built the way a foundation is built, poured, set, permanent. You can put that human on a Class 2 administrative station for 7 years or 70, and the architecture does not change. The reflexes may go unexercised. The pain gate may go untested. The proprioceptive resolution may go unmeasured. But the infrastructure is there, intact, and when the load returns, it carries it the way it always carried it, without strain, without alarm, without thinking about it. 7 years on Keth administrative station, Pelithvar had not made Alin Tavik less than what Korethven had built. It had made her a Class 15 substrate with 7 years of Keth procedural knowledge, systems fluency, and institutional literacy, layered on top of a foundation that the assessment board's methodology could not see because it was not looking for something that does not attenuate. The board had measured behavior. Behavior can be quiet. It can sit in a dining hall and eat the same meal at the same time and score in the upper third, and flinch at nothing and heal in half the time in watch rooms like terrain, and never once perform in a way that forces the file to be revised. The substrate underneath it does not need to perform. It simply is. Vorsilith submitted a formal review request to the assessment board that afternoon. The filing covered the attenuation coefficient methodology, the grade 7 classification, and what the document described as observed discrepancy between assessed and demonstrated origin substrate function during corridor exercise 11C7, conducted under non-standard calibration conditions. The non-standard calibration conditions were noted, but the responsible party was not named. Whether Vorsilith knew who had changed the corridor's difficulty, and whether he chose not to identify them, is something I have considered many times since. The Drellin are meticulous. They are also, in their way, precise about what their meticulousness encompasses. It is possible that Vorsilith filed the review on the methodology because the methodology was the thing that was wrong, and the corridor calibration, whoever changed it, and for whatever reason, was merely the instrument that proved it. The instrument was not the finding was the substrate. Drev Thane requested a transfer to a different cohort the following week. His request was denied. He remained in our cohort for the rest of the training cycle. He did not call her the partial again. He did not call her anything. In group exercises, he deferred to her tactical positioning without being asked, the way Orc defer to a higher grade presence, not with words, but with the angle of their shoulders and the set of their feet and the direction of their iron-colored eyes. He never acknowledged the calibration change. No one asked him about it. I do not think anyone needed to. The corridor had answered every question that mattered, and the questions it had answered were not the ones Drev had intended to ask. Pel Orenth submitted a supplemental analysis of Stage 6, the resource management problem, demonstrating that Alin's single-word correction on Vent 3 reflected a systems-level comprehension of the life support grid architecture that exceeded the exercise's design solution space. He filed it as an academic note. It sits in the Academy's exercise archive. I have read it twice. It is the most careful piece of work Pel has produced at Kethren, and it says nothing about what it means. But Pel is Keth, and the Keth say what they mean with data, not with conclusions. The data says, the design solution for Stage 6 assumed a maximum cognitive resolution of Grade 8. The correction Alin offered operated at Grade 13. Pel did not write Grade 13 in the analysis. He wrote the numbers and left the comparison to the reader. The Keth consider this sufficient. I have spoken with Vorsilith once since the review was filed. It was not a formal conversation. He was in the observation bay, reviewing biometric archives, and I was retrieving a signals kit I had left after a training block. He did not look up when I entered. His vascular lattice was pulsing in a pattern I had not seen before, irregular, arrhythmic, a Drellin signature of sustained uncertainty. I stood by the equipment locker and waited, because Sorin do not interrupt Drellin who are processing. After several minutes he said, without looking up, the methodology was correct. I said nothing, The methodology was correct for what it measured, he said. The error was in what it did not measure. Behavior attenuates. Substrate does not. We measured behavior and inferred substrate. The inference was wrong. He paused. His vascular lattice went still. The inference was always wrong. I have thought about this often. Vorsilith is not a careless evaluator. He is the most precise biometric specialist I have encountered. His error was not imprecision. It was the assumption that precision in measurement guarantees accuracy in conclusion. He measured everything the methodology told him to measure. He measured it flawlessly. And the thing he needed to see was underneath all of it, untouched, unmeasured, and permanent. Aline and I eat in the dining hall at the same time. She still sits near the ventilation outlet. She still sits alone, though the seat across from her is no longer avoided. Pell takes it sometimes. And once I saw Drev sitting there in silence, eating, his bone plates flat, his iron eyes fixed on his tray. She does not discuss the corridor. She has not mentioned it to me, to Pell, to anyone I have asked. When I brought it up once, obliquely, weeks later, she looked at me with an expression I can only describe as mild patience. The look of someone who has been asked about a thing that, to them, was not remarkable. The corridor was fine, she said. The calibration was high, but the stage design was predictable once you read the architecture. It would have been harder with weather. With weather, she meant real atmospheric conditions, wind, precipitation, thermal shift, particulate load, the variables that a Class 15 world produces and a training corridor does not. The corridor's most demanding setting, the one that had sidelined a Class 9 combat specialist and a Class 4 signals operator and cracked a Keth carapace, was to her a simplified version of the environment she had been born into, a controlled exercise, a reduced load. A thing she had cleared not because she was exceptional but because, to her substrate, it was not exceptional. I asked her if she had known, before the exercise, that she could do what she did. She considered the question briefly and precisely. I knew what Kethren was, she said. The file said something different. I read the file. I went a class. She paused, and for a moment her expression shifted, not much, not dramatically, just a slight tilt of the head and a steadying of the eyes that I had learned over 7 months was the closest she came to emphasis. The file was not wrong about me. It was wrong about what Kethren builds. It does not build a thing that unmakes. It does not build a thing that diminishes. It builds the other kind. That was all she said. She went back to eating. The meal was a grain and protein mixture she had assembled from the dining hall's dispensers in a combination that no menu offered, something she had worked out in her first week and had not varied since. It is not a menu item. It is a formula from her head, calibrated to a nutritional profile I do not have the background to evaluate. The assessment board's revised methodology arrived on the Academy's internal system 6 weeks after the exercise. It is 41 pages longer than the original. It introduces a new variable, substrate permanence index, defined as the resistance of origin world physiological architecture to environmental displacement over time. The index was not part of Methodology Supplement 11C. It was not part of any prior methodology in the Keth Administrative Zone's training literature. Vorsilith's team built it from the ground up using Aline's biometric data, and a literature review that I am told runs to 300 citations, including field studies from 11 Deathworld origin populations across 4 administrative zones. The revised methodology does not use the term diluted origin. It does not use the term attenuation coefficient. It replaces both with a framework that acknowledges what the corridor demonstrated and what the biometric data confirmed beyond statistical dispute, that the substrate of a Deathworld human is not a variable that degrades with environmental displacement. It is a constant. The constant does not care where you put it. It does not care how long you put it there. It does not care what your methodology says about it. Aline's classification under the revised methodology has not been formally updated. The review is pending a board vote that has been postponed twice. I do not know the official reason. I have a theory, which I have not shared, which is that the board understands what the revised classification would mean, not just for Alin Tavik, but for every human who has ever been assessed under the original methodology across every facility in every administrative zone. If the attenuation coefficient is wrong for one, it is wrong for all of them. Every diluted origin human in the system carries a file that says grade 7 or grade 6 or grade 8, and underneath that file is a substrate that has not diluted at all. The reclassification would not be individual, it would be institutional. And institutions do not revise themselves quickly, even when the data is on the wall. In the meantime, Alin's file still reads grade 7. She has not asked for it to be changed. She attends the standard tier training track. She scores in the upper third. She eats the same meal at the same time in the same seat. She repairs her boots when the adhesive fails. The corridor's completion record is not under review. It is not pending a vote. It is a fixed entry in the exercise archive, time-stamped, biometrically verified, and unambiguous. Tavik E-corridor complete. Calibration Class 9 Solo. The revised methodology is longer than the original. I have read it carefully. It is more thorough, more cautious, and more honest about what it does not know. I do not think it is closer.